This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's special town meeting. My name is Stacy Yarborough. I'm the town clerk. And at this time, I will be convening the special town meeting. Before we begin, though, with the topics of the evening, we must elect a moderator. The moderator is nominated and elected by the members of the town meeting. It's the moderator's function to bring before our meeting all items of the warning and also to assist anyone who has a question about parliamentary procedure or needs clarification with regard to the issues. Further, when it's time to vote on any issue tonight, including the moderator, please be aware that you must be an elector to cast a vote. To be an elector of the town, one must have been a registered voter in the town at the time of the most recent election, or one who pays taxes on the most recent grand list for property assessed of not less than $1,000, a citizen of the United States, and 18 years of age or older. This regulation will be in force all night. If you have any questions as to whether you know you're a registered voter or qualified, you can check with me and I can check you off the list. Now, at this time, I'm going to open up the floor for a meeting moderator. Are there any nominations for meeting moderator?
Nominate Teresa Renciano-Vili.
And is there a second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations for a nominator for our meeting? For a moderator for our meeting. Okay, hearing none, this time I will call the question as to the nomination and move forward with a vote. All in favor of Teresa Renciano-Vili as tonight's moderator, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed by saying nay. Okay, the motion passes. This time I now declare Teresa Renciano-Vili as our moderator.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. The town clerk will now read the warning call of tonight's special town meeting.
A special town meeting of the electors and citizens qualified to vote in town meetings of the town of North Haven, Connecticut will be held in the upstairs conference room number 1 of the Memorial Town Hall, 18 Church Street, North Haven, Connecticut, on Tuesday, October 9th, 2018 at 6 p.m. for the following purposes. Number 1, to consider and discuss the recommendations of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen. A, to appropriate $500,000 for the acquisition of and improvements to one or more parcels of land for preservation as open space. Such one or more parcels of land, including terms and conditions, shall be determined by the Board of Selectmen pursuant to Town Charter Section 406. The appropriation may be spent for acquisition costs preliminary thereto, including without limitation, survey fees, testing, engineering and other consultant fees, feasibility and planning studies related to potential acquisitions, cleanup and remediation, grant management and other administrative costs, legal fees, net temporary interest and other financing costs, and other expenses related to the acquisitions and their financing. B, to issue bonds or notes of the town in any amount not to exceed $500,000. To provide that the amount of bonds or notes authorized to be issued shall be reduced by any grants received for the project. C, to issue temporary notes of the town in amount not to exceed $500,000 in anticipation of such bonds or notes. D, to determine or authorize the first selectman and the treasurer of the town to determine the amounts, dates, interest rates, maturities, redemption provisions, form, and other details of the bonds or notes, and to perform all other acts which are necessary or appropriate to issue the bonds or notes. E, to make such action to allow temporary advances of available funds which the town reasonably expects will be reimbursed from the proceeds of borrowings, and to authorize the first selectman and the treasurer to bind the town pursuant to such representations and covenants as they deem necessary or advisable in order to maintain the continued exemption from federal income taxation of interest on the bonds or notes authorized by the resolution, if issued on a tax-exempt basis, including covenants to pay rebates of investment earnings to the United States in future years. F, to authorize the first selectman and the treasurer to make representations and enter into written agreements for the benefit of holders of the bonds or notes to provide secondary market disclosure information, which agreements may include such terms as they deem advisable or appropriate in order to comply with applicable laws or rules pertaining to the sale or purchase of such bonds or notes, and G, to authorize the first selectman, the treasurer, and other proper officers of the town to take all other action which is necessary or desirable to complete the project and to issue bonds or notes to finance the aforesaid appropriation. Number 2, to consider and discuss the recommendations of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen. A, to appropriate $2 million for the milling and paving of town roadways. The project shall consist of milling and removal of waste materials, paving and materials, installation of manholes and drainage risers, traffic protection, including signage and police and flag personnel. The appropriation may be spent for design, demolition, and construction costs, equipment, furnishings, materials, site improvements, survey costs, architect fees, engineering fees, other consultants' fees, legal fees, net temporary interest, and other financing costs, and other expenses related to the project. B, to issue bonds or notes of the town in the amount not to exceed $2 million, to provide that the amount of bonds or notes authorized to be issued shall be reduced by any grants received for the project. C, to issue temporary notes of the town in an amount not to exceed $2 million in anticipation of such bonds or notes. D, to determine or authorize the first selectman and the treasurer of the town to determine the amounts, dates, interest rates, maturities, redemption provisions, form, and other details of the bonds or notes, and to perform all other acts which are necessary or appropriate to issue the bonds or notes. E, to take such action to allow temporary advances of available funds which the town reasonably expects will be reimbursed from the proceeds of borrowings, and to authorize the first selectman and the treasurer to bind the town pursuant to such representations and covenants as they deem necessary or advisable in order to maintain the continued exemption from federal income taxation of interest on the bonds or notes authorized by the resolution, if issued on a tax-exempt basis, including covenants to pay rebates of investment earnings to the United States in future years. F, to authorize the first selectman and the treasurer to make representations and enter into written agreements for the benefit of holders of the bonds or notes to provide secondary market disclosure information, which agreements may include such terms as they deem advisable or appropriate in order to comply with applicable laws or rules pertaining to the sale or purchase of such bonds or notes. And G, to authorize the first selectman, the treasurer, and other proper officers of the town to take all other action which is necessary or desirable to complete the project and to issue bonds or notes to finance the aforesaid appropriation. There's also a third item on the call which has been withdrawn, so we will not move forward on that third item, but I will read it since it was part of the call. Number 3, to consider and vote upon the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen to adopt amendments to Chapter 61 of the ordinances of the town of North Haven pertaining to the recycling authority of the town, as the South Central Connecticut Recycling Authority has ceased to exist, and adopt amendments to the garbage, rubbish, and refuse ordinance at Chapter 127 of the ordinances of the town of North Haven regarding the collection and disposal of solid waste and recyclable materials to comply with amendments to applicable statute regulations and the statewide and regional solid waste management plans dated at North Haven, Connecticut, the 6th day of September 2018 by the North Haven Board of Selectmen.
Okay. So now that we've already been advised that agenda item number 3 is withdrawn, no business will be conducted during the course of tonight's proceedings beyond the other 2 agenda items that you just heard from the town clerk. So the town clerk will now read the first item again on the agenda. I'm going to amend this. The town clerk will now read resolved, and just the first line of item number 1.
So agenda item number 1, resolve to consider and discuss the recommendations of the Board of Finance, resolve to approve the recommendations of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen with regard to the appropriation of $500,000 for the acquisition of and improvements to one or more parcels of land for preservation as open space.
Do we have a second? Okay, is there any discussion? Is there anyone who'd like to speak to this item? Ms. Sadowski, please come back and state your name.
Lynn Sadowski, Director of Public Works for the town of North Haven. We have been working closely with the Open Space Advisory Committee, who has been meeting over the past 2.5, 3 years to discuss potential open space properties. Part of the difficulties that we have is there's a lot of properties out there we could consider for open space, but not always do we have a willing seller, which is one of the key issues for us. We've seen some properties get developed in town, asking sometimes 3 or 4 times, sometimes 6 times what we are offering them. And our process has been to locate a parcel for open space, discuss with the willing seller to get permission with them to conduct what's called an appraisal. We have 2 separate Yellow Book appraisals. They're federal appraisals. We then take the 2 appraisals, and whether it is a large property or small, whether it has a property with a structure or not, we then ask the 2 appraisers to conduct the appraisals. We then average the 2 appraisals, and whatever that value is, that has been our process, our procedure that we have followed. We then would take that number, bring it to our first selectman, Michael Frieda, and also our finance director, Edward Swinkowski, and we discuss what we could formally offer that potential willing seller. So we have come a great distance. Our chairman, Steve Fitzgerald, is here in the second row, and essentially what we've done is we have made great headway. We've purchased the Sinaway property and received a grant for almost half of what that property was worth. And we've also purchased 603 Middletown Avenue, which is Yolanda Valentino's farm. 2 great pieces. Shortly after that, we met with another willing seller on a Ridge Road parcel, and we do have a willing seller on that with a appraised price, which is the appraisers came up with the 2 prices at $400,000, and now a 4th piece of property has come to our attention, and we are working with a realtor because this property has gone into an estate, and that potentially may be between $80,000 and $120,000. I say maybe because it's got a structure on it that needs to come down, and it's a little bit more complex. So we follow the same process. We try to move forward with what we feel is fair on behalf of our taxpayers. And the first property we're looking at is 14.7 acres of land, and the second piece is 1.05 acres of land. And there have been other properties that we have talked to. But here we are today asking for consideration for another capital bond for $500,000 to cover the 2 parcels that we're looking at and the associated maybe survey, the cost of the appraisals, the cost of our legal fees, and things that go with our programs. Sometimes we're conducting a phase 1 site assessment. And so I come before you to request that you support this capital bond. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please state your name, address.
Hi, Steve Fitzgerald, 34 River Road, and I'm chair of the town's Open Space Advisory Committee. We are, just as the name says, an advisory committee constituted with members from various other committees and commissions in town, including conservation, planning and zoning, so on and so forth. I happen to be the first selectman's representative on the committee. And as just so you all understand the process, we have looked at over the years many parcels in town, created a priority list, and are always up against the reality that you can't acquire open space unless you have a willing seller. And a willing seller is frankly somebody who's likely willing to sell their property for less than full market value, right? Less than its fully developed value. And so when these parcels come along, while we consider several different characteristics of each parcel, including, for example, what's the likelihood that this parcel can be developed? Is it connected or contiguous to another lot of open space? Does it have certain natural benefits for preservation? All of these things are taken into consideration. There have, frankly, over the years, there have been some offers of parcels that have not met the committee's determination that it's worthy of a recommendation. But in this case, these two parcels that are the focus of this particular bond request met with the unanimous approval of the entire Open Space Advisory Committee that the town should pursue acquisition of these parcels. And so I'm here both individually and in my capacity of the Open Space Committee to highly recommend that you all support this bonding so that we can preserve these particular parcels specifically, as well as generally support the acquisition of open space for the various reasons that acquisition of open space is a positive for the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to item number 1? Okay. Seeing no hands. All in favor as to calling the question as to item number 1 signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, hearing no one saying nay, the motion passes.
Now you gotta do the vote.
All in favor of item number 1 on tonight's agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by saying nay. Okay, the motion passes. The town clerk will now read the second item of the agenda, but we will just read the resolution tonight.
Item number 2, resolve to approve the recommendations of the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen to appropriate $2 million for the milling and paving of town roadways.
Is there a second? All in favor of calling the question as to item number 2 signify, oh, I'm sorry. Is there any discussion? I'm skipping pages. Any discussion? Yes, for Selectman Frida.
Thank you.
Just skip the whole page.
So thank you first for approving the bond resolution for $500,000 on open space. I think it was very eloquently described as to what we're trying to accomplish. And I wanted to give everyone an overview regarding the roads and the milling and paving initiative that we have here in town. To give you some perspective, there's approximately 194 miles worth of roadway in the town of North Haven, spanning across 22.1 square miles. Now, out of the 194 miles, approximately 160 are town-owned roads. So it's been one of my initiatives to pave every year. I believe that citizens in any town want and require roads to be paved. To give you some sharper perspective, it costs approximately $200,000 a mile to pave and mill 1 mile worth of roadway. So if you look at roughly 160 miles, it would take 16 years at what we're trying to accomplish tonight, which would allow us to do 10 miles worth of roadway. Every year we go out to bond for about $2 million. That, once again, allows us to do 10 miles. So we're on a continuous improvement program here in North Haven, which includes not only the renovation of buildings that we're bonding for, but this particular item on this particular agenda at this particular meeting, which is to request a $2 million bond appropriation. And to give you one final point of perspective, the way it works is the asphalt plants open every May, and then they close in October. So while we're completing some paving this month in early November, this bond requisition will help pay for the roads coming up in the spring and the fall of next year. So the paving cycle will begin again after we conclude this month in early November, in probably late May, early June, throughout July of next year, continuing through probably October. So I'm requesting your consideration on this appropriation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, sir.
Jay Bard, Sherwood Drive. Mike and I have had discussions about this before, and let me say that I agree we need to have an ongoing program. However, the program should not be funded by bonding, especially as Mike just said, this is something we want to do every year on a recurring basis. This is road maintenance. This should not be bonded. This should be paid out of the budget every year. So I have some questions I'd like to ask, because we've been doing this for several years now. What is the cost of actually bonding? Because if we issue $2 million, we have to spend money to issue the bonds. So, Mike, I don't know if you have the answers or if you can get the answers
Okay,
as to.
I'm gonna just jump in. If you ask all the questions, and then I'll ask either for Selectman Frida or maybe Lynn Sadowski to get up and answer them. That might be the easiest way to do it, unless you'd like to come up, Mike and Lynn, and answer as the questions happen. What's your preference?
Why don't we let Jay finish with the question?
Okay.
The cost of issuing the bonds. At current rate, it's got to be, $50,000 or more just for the interest, and not counting the escrow for the principal to be paid over a period of 16 years, 17 years, whatever the term of the bonds are. The legal expenses, the cost of the underwriters, all of that would, over the long term, double the cost. So if it's $2 million worth of bonds, we'd only have maybe 1.8, I'm throwing a number out, maybe you can update that for me, $1.8 million actually to be used to pave the roads, because we have to pay out the expenses of the bonding. A long time ago, Mike had made the comment that unlike Hamden, we don't bond our ongoing expense. This is an ongoing expense. This should not be bonded. This should be paid from our budget. So, if they come up with the figures for the actual cost of issuing the bonds, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll try to answer the questions, and Jay and I have known each other for years, and we've agreed on many issues, but this is an issue that we've totally disagreed on. And the reason we don't put the $2 million a year in the budget every year is that right there would raise taxes about 0.67 mils every year. So what we know in municipal government is for major improvements, bonding tends to be a tool and an instrument to smooth out the tax burden for the residents. If we were to add $2 million a year in this budget, this year's budget, next year's budget, and subsequent budget to continue to pave roads, you'd be getting a significant tax increase right out of the gate for that. Then, on top of that, any of the other organic costs of the government, including the Board of Ed requests, some capital requests. So we're trying to minimize the burden for the taxpayers by doing it this way. That $2 million may add approximately $80,000 to $90,000 a year on the debt service line in our budget. We'd have to double check those numbers. And just so you know, I'm going to get technical from a financial standpoint. Our debt burden to assets is less than 10%. Our debt ratio to expenditures is less than 10%. And our debt burden to grand list is about 3 or 4%. These are key indices that rating agencies love about North Haven. So rather than give you tax increases every year by adding it to the budget, we are utilizing the fact that the town financially is tremendously under-leveraged relating to debt, unlike other municipalities who have great debt burdens. We're trying to help the citizens by doing it this way, by using the capacity we have to borrow at record low interest rates for us because we're AAA rated financially. That's why we do it. So I'm encouraging you to vote yes on this bonding resolution.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, sir, you can come back up.
I would like to ask a further question based on that. How much are we paying now cumulatively, and by the end of the 16 years, how much will we be paying? That is going to be a much larger figure because we're paying double, because we're paying for the past how many years, and if it's a 16-year cycle, we're going to be paying cumulatively for these bonds over each 16 years. We're going to have 16 years worth of bonds outstanding by the end of that period of time, which is going to be significantly more than what it would pay to put in the annual budget.
Okay, who would like to answer that question? Anybody or? Okay. Okay.
So we're meeting tomorrow. We're actually having a rating call with the rating agencies. And in government, we have what we call an amortization schedule. So again, I disagree with Mr. Bard on this. Yes, it may cost us more for interest costs over the course of time, but we're amortizing this over 17 to 20 years. At the same time, we're adding debt service by renovating buildings, but we're also retiring debt service from other projects that we've had that were built in the past. So for each and every one of you, and for those watching on NHTV, we are trying to protect a significant tax increase for you by adding $2 million worth of debt every year to this budget. Bonding is an instrument, as I said, and a tool. Over the course of 17 to 20 years, the average road will last for 25 years, paved and milled properly. So we're bonding for a period of time that when it's paid for, the road will still be in good shape for at least 5 years if we do a 20-year amortization. So we don't have the amortization to schedule here tonight because tomorrow we have the big meeting with the rating agencies to retain AAA rated status. So we can debate this, but for each and every one of you, do you want a significant tax increase every year by adding $2 million more to the budget? Or do you want to have the town utilize its great financial capacity, the fact that it's AAA rated financially, and the fact that we're highly under-leveraged? That, ladies and gentlemen, protects each and every one of you from a tax increase based on just roads being added to the budget at $2 million a year. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Is there any further question or comment as to item number 2? Okay. Seeing no hands. All in favor of calling the question as to item number 2 signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. We'll now vote on the resolution. All in favor of number 2 of tonight's agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. We have 1 nay. However, the motion passes. As there is no further business to be considered at this special town meeting, I hereby declare tonight's special town meeting adjourned. The minutes of the meeting will be made available by the town clerk as soon as possible. Thanks.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.